Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar to discuss the new education materials from the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to bioethics.gov in the next few days. My name is Hillary Wakay-Vyers. I'm the Communications Director for the Bioethics Commission, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by Executive Director Lisa Lee, Associate Directors Kate Spector-Baghdadi and Michelle Groman, and Research Analyst Misty Alt-Anderson, who is leading our bioethics education efforts. You'll hear first from Lisa, who will give a brief overview of the Bioethics Commission, and then Misty, Kate, and Michelle, who will walk us through the Bioethics Commission's pedagogical materials, including the new modules. We'll then open it up for questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Lisa for a brief overview. Lisa?
Thank you, Hillary. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled that all of you are able to join us today and to hear about this exciting new project we have here at the Commission. Before we get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues and a little bit about what the Commission has recommended in terms of our educational materials. Then I'll hand things over to my colleagues who will talk specifically about some of our materials, our topic-based modules, a study guide for a specific Commission report, and then some research resources that we have posted. So the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues, or as we affectionately call it, the Bioethics Commission, was created in 2009 by executive order by the President, and he created this commission as a federal advisory committee to advise him on identifying and promoting practices and policies that would ensure that scientific research, healthcare delivery, and technological innovation are conducted in a socially and ethically responsible manner. Our commission, led by University of Pennsylvania's president, Dr. Amy Gutman, consists of experts in many fields. Just like bioethics, it's multidisciplinary, and we have experts from philosophy, law, medicine, science, theology, etc. And this group advises the president on these bioethical issues, and in doing so, educates the nation on bioethics. The distinct features of our charge allow this group to identify and to analyze a broad set of topics. The Commission, since its inception in 2009, has dealt with topics as diverse as synthetic biology, STD studies in Latin America, specifically Guatemala, research, protections of research participants, privacy and whole genome sequencing and new technologies, medical countermeasure research with children, and our two current projects, incidental findings in clinical research and direct-to-consumer settings, and neuroscience and ethics. This broad set of topics has led to a number of important educational products that we'll be discussing today. Some of those are integrated topical materials across our different reports. Others are specific study guides that relate to a particular report. And some are data that will be available or are available now for original research. Over the Commission's past 5 reports, the Commission has issued 4 separate recommendations for ethical education and researcher responsibility, including 2 recommendations on specifically bioethics education. One on who should receive bioethics education. Because of the multidisciplinarity of medical research and biomedical research in general, the teams that make up these kinds of research endeavors involve a great deal more than simply clinicians, biomedical researchers, and epidemiologists, for example, but have broadened to include things, people like engineers, material scientists, and others, people who have come from different ethical backgrounds. And the Commission concluded in its first report that it is this mix of researchers and this mix of disciplines that make up these research teams that all need training in bioethics, that all need a baseline and a continuing training on these topics. Then in moral science, this report, the commission made a recommendation on how bioethics training should happen. They recommended that rigorous courses in research ethics occur at all levels, including undergraduate, graduate levels, and the professional level, where ongoing engagement of investigators occur and experience at all levels of experience, including not just where we teach people about a research ethics course or responsible conduct of research course, but where ethical education is infused throughout. So, given that, we've gone to work here at the Commission developing materials based on the Commission's own work. And these materials are intended to be used in a variety of settings and deal with the contemporary issues facing our nation today. These materials are available at bioethics.gov on our Education tab. And on this tab, you'll also find on the right side here a featured video where Commission members have shared some of their thoughts about the importance of bioethics education and the resources we're offering here today and in the future. In addition to this, we offer an opportunity for you to give us feedback on our materials, both constructive feedback on how and what we can do better to serve the needs that bioethics educators have, and also some success stories. We'd be very interested in hearing how you've used these successfully so we can share those with your colleagues. So the goals really of our putting these materials out there is really to support ethics education, to facilitate integrating analyses into existing curricula. We're not putting forward a comprehensive curriculum, but rather some materials that will complement existing programs or that will serve as standalone short courses in a variety of settings. Our target audiences here include both the traditional classroom setting, but also non-traditional educational settings, everything from a seminar to a journal or book club to ethics training courses in professional settings. We focus here on skill building, decision making, and incorporating ethical perspectives into daily work. We have two approaches with these materials. One is a report-specific approach where we'll talk shortly about a study guide for specific reports and also research resources, and also a topic-specific approach where we'll look at ethical principles, for example, informed consent or community engagement across different reports. We'll look at also potentially common themes like ethical issues surrounding vulnerable populations or the common rule in research ethics, all using maximum flexibility so you can use these materials in your existing courses and add real live examples of contemporary ethical issues or analyses addressed by a presidential commission. For more on our topic-based modules, that is the newest addition to our pedagogical set of materials, I'll introduce to you here Misty Alt-Anderson. Misty?
Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. As Lisa mentioned, in addition to making the recommendations encouraging improvements in ethics education, the Bioethics Commission has developed topic-based educational modules around the content and ethical analysis in its reports. These modules are easy to find through our website, which is bioethics.gov. Clicking on the Education tab, circled here, brings you to this page, which provides two different ways by which to access the modules that interest you. On the left side of your screen, in that circle, you can choose to view the modules either by topic or by Bioethics Commission report. Clicking on one of those options will then take you to the appropriate page, which will look like one of these. On the left, you can see one page organizing all the currently available modules according to topic. Each topic includes a background module and relevant report-specific modules. The background module provides foundational information, ethical reasoning, applications, questions, discussion points, and a list of additional resources. Report-specific modules, which build upon the background and provide bioethical analysis of contemporary examples for real-life ethical challenges addressed by a presidential commission. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the same modules organized by Bioethics Commission report. The modules are actually the same pieces, but they're provided in two different lists here to make it easier for you to find the materials that interest you based on the discussions you're having in your course or training session. Now, I'd like to walk you through a sample of what you will find in some of our modules. The example I'm going to use is the Informed Consent Background module to start. Now, this module provides an introduction to the informed consent process and background information, including why informed consent is ethically necessary, historical context around how informed consent requirements came to be, information on applicable federal regulations, and a description of some of the challenges commonly encountered in the informed consent process. The background module also provides discussion questions, including starting points to help an instructor facilitate group discussion around those points, application exercises, a glossary, and a list of additional resources. Now, as an example of a report-specific module, let me briefly describe for you the content of our Informed Consent in Privacy in Progress and Whole Genome Sequencing module. The introduction and background sections of this module provide contextual information about the report itself and recommendations that the Bioethics Commission made in the Privacy in Progress report that are relevant to informed consent. The module also provides suggested reading for students, which includes sections of the report, discussion questions, again with the starting points for discussion, problem-based learning exercises for the group, application exercises that encourage students to consider informed consent within the context of their studies or their own research, a glossary, and again, additional resources. Here is a sample discussion question from the Informed Consent in Privacy in Progress module. The question asks the group or the class to discuss the relative advantages and disadvantages of various approaches to informed consent within the context specifically of whole genome sequencing. Now, within the starting points for discussion in the module, there are four major approaches described, which are also described in more detail in the suggested reading. So if the students have done the reading, they'll be prepared for this discussion. It doesn't necessarily lead to a lecture presentation. The idea here is that the students have read the materials before class to facilitate the discussion. Then the starting points go on to outline some of the pros and cons of each approach within the context of whole genome sequencing, allowing the instructor to consider each thoroughly before the discussion to be prepared. Now, here's an example of a problem-based learning exercise, also from the same module, the Informed Consent in Privacy in Progress module. The question briefly points out an actual database that the Bioethics Commission cites in the report, and then asks the students or the group to identify which approach to informed consent it demonstrates. The exercise identifies a journal article for additional reading about that specific database and asks the group or the class to discuss the informed consent process, how it is used, and in doing so, how it reconciles the protection of individual privacy with the promotion of scientific progress. Hopefully, these examples give you an idea of what the Bioethics Commission topics-based modules has to offer. So currently available on the website, we offer modules on informed consent and on community engagement. And so far, the modules feature 3 of the Bioethics Commission reports. Those reports are Ethically Impossible, STD Research in Guatemala from 1946 to 1948, Moral Science, Protecting Participants in Human Subjects Research, and Privacy in Progress in Whole Genome Sequencing. Additional modules on new topics and incorporating other Bioethics Commission reports are currently under development and will be made available on the website on a rolling basis. We hope that you will find these modules to be a helpful teaching tool, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Please do send us comments, suggestions, and your feedback about these modules to education@bioethics.gov. Now, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Kate Spector-Baghdadi, who will share with you the very first educational product generated by the Bioethics Commission.
Thank you, Misty. So, in addition to our modules that Misty just spoke with you about, the Bioethics Commission has also put out one all-inclusive study guide of its historical review and ethical analysis of the Public Health Service's sexually transmitted disease research in Guatemala in the 1940s. In the Commission's Ethically Impossible report, which you can see here on the left, it found that the Guatemala experiments involved gross violations of research ethics as judged against standards both today and at the time. One of the most important things that the Commission hoped to result from its historical review is for the research community to be able to learn from the Guatemala experiments and ensure that something like that never happens again. Therefore, today, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking with you about what the Guatemala experiments are, why they make for an effective research ethics case study, and some of the tools that the Commission has created so that the next generation of researchers and bioethicists can learn from as opposed to repeat some of the mistakes of the past. In the briefest of overviews, the U.S. Public Health Service, in concert with many Guatemalan officials, conducted federally funded research in Guatemala from 1947 to 1948, which included intentionally exposing several vulnerable Guatemalan populations to STDs to test methods to prevent the spread of those STDs, as well as proper penicillin dosages for their treatment. The Commission found that these researchers exposed over 1,200 subjects to STDs via painful and invasive methods during these experiments, and that not a single subject consented. In fact, there are many examples of explicit deceit on the part of the researchers. Once, when I was giving this presentation, an astute colleague of mine asked why I thought that the Guatemala experiments made a good case study for teaching research ethics. He explained that he generally used case studies that were ethically murky, so that students could debate the ethics and contemplate how they would improve the study themselves. His reasoning was that if the Guatemalan experiments were ethically impossible, that they wouldn't make for a good learning tool. So here's my answer to that. First, as a teacher, instead of having to pick out many different cases to illuminate different points that you're trying to get at and spend time learning various fact patterns, the Guatemala experiments highlight in one case study issues regarding vulnerable subject populations, race, autonomy and consent, study design, and even oversight and scientific publication. It's truly the perfect storm of research ethics. Second, I think it's really important to note that the Guatemala experiments were not merely the product of a single bad actor gone rogue. They were generated and supported by a structured grant system and a defined research environment. A National Institutes of Health study section recommended the Guatemala experiments for federal funding, and the then Surgeon General Thomas Perrin signed off on the protocol. Public Health Service supervisors and some study section members on the ground in the United States received detailed reports of what was going on in Guatemala and conducted site visits. Yet the research did not stop until the funding ran out. The Guatemala experiments were not the product of an individual failure. They were the product of an institutional one. And that the very structure put in place at the time to protect subjects would allow and support something so obviously ethically impossible to us now is in fact ethically compelling. Last, I hope that people will be interested in teaching the Guatemala case study because the Commission has put out materials to make it easier for you to do so. First, on the right is the Ethically Impossible Study Guide, which I'm going to walk you through in more detail in a minute. Second are the primary source documents from the experiments that the Commission used to conduct its historical review. Some of the documents are included in the body of the study guide. The majority of the documents, however, are actually linked in the endnotes of the Ethically Impossible report for you to access. Last is the Guatemala Subject Data Spreadsheet, which is a de-identified, sortable Excel chart of the medical and research records of the experimental subjects that the Commission compiled. The intent of this spreadsheet is to encourage further ethical analysis of the experiments. All three of these resources are available at bioethics.gov. I'm happy to answer any questions about the primary source documents in the spreadsheet after our presentation, but for now I'm going to focus on our study guide offering. The study guide is broken into 5 different topics, including the historical context of the experiments, the actual protocol design, the vulnerable populations used as subjects, specific ethical issues with the research design, including racism, secrecy, consent, and scientific publication, and then the importance and challenges of reviewing ethical standards retrospectively. The goal of the study guide for each of these topics is to be a standalone resource for students to read relevant background facts and analyze primary source materials for themselves. The Commission also offered several open-ended questions for discussion, as well as some further recommended reading. As a quick example of what these individual sections look like, this is the one focusing on the secrecy and deceit of the researchers during the Guatemala experiments. The Commission was able to show that the researchers knew that what they were doing at the time was ethically suspect through their correspondence to each other and references to public human research standards. For example, here's an excerpt from the science column of the New York Times in 1947, saying that injecting living syphilis germs into human bodies is, quote, ethically impossible. Yet the following month, Dr. John Cutler, the principal investigator on the ground, writes to his supervisor at the Public Health Service, telling him that Cutler read the Times note and that what he learned from it was that they should only relay details of the experiments to people who, quote, can be trusted not to talk, as the Guatemala researchers were just a little bit concerned about the possibility of having anything said about our program that would adversely affect its continuation, end quote. Both of these primary source excerpts are available in the study guide itself for students to analyze and discuss. The Commission also included discussion questions in each section. The ones for this section, for example, focus on whether a difference in opinion on the ethics of the experiments might have been justified at the time, or why researchers might have thought that when they injected syphilis into human beings, it was somehow different, why their research was exceptional. So that's just a brief overview of the Guatemala case study, why it can be a helpful resource to bioethics educators, and the tools that the Commission has provided to enable people such as yourselves to provide that kind of research ethics education. I'm happy to answer any questions after, but with that I would like to turn this over to my colleague Michelle Groman, who will present some tools for training on empirical bioethics. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. As you can see from this title slide, I'll be discussing materials that we've titled Research Resources. Now, while these materials are certainly tools for further research and scholarship, they can also be used for bioethics education, and that's what I'll be focusing on in my presentation today. Now, many, including the Bioethics Commission, have recognized the importance of empirical bioethics. But in order to conduct empirical bioethics, people need to be trained in its methods and its applications. Through its educational materials, the Bioethics Commission is providing tools for such training. Like the other educational materials you've heard discussed today, these materials can be located on the education page at bioethics.gov through the study guides and other resources link that you see circled here. There, you'll find 2 products under the Research Resources heading. The first is the Human Subjects Research Landscape Project Analysis Dataset. That's a collection of data that's tied to the Commission's Moral Science Report. It's project-level data about human subjects research supported by the federal government. Also there, you'll find the spreadsheet that Kate mentioned earlier, the Guatemala Subject Data Spreadsheet. Now, I'll focus on the Landscape Project dataset as a potential teaching tool, giving a broad overview of what it is and what sorts of questions it can help to answer. Of course, we'll be happy to take questions about the analysis data set, but also the subject data spreadsheet during our question and answer session after the presentation. President Obama charged the Bioethics Commission to determine if federal regulations and international standards adequately guard the health and well-being of participants in scientific studies supported by the federal government. With that charge in hand, the Bioethics Commission initially asked a very basic question. What scientific studies with people are supported by the federal government? In looking for an answer to that question, the Bioethics Commission quickly learned that such data was not readily available in any systematic way. Data such as what you see listed here, types of studies, the locations of studies, federal investment across the federal government. The Commission concluded that it needed such data to inform its deliberations for the Moral Science Report and went about collecting that data itself. The Commission's data gathering and analysis effort is what we've called the Human Subjects Research Landscape Project, or Landscape Project for short. As part of that project, the Commission reached out to and worked with 18 federal departments and agencies that have adopted the Common Rule to collect the project-level data about human subjects research that these agencies support. Ultimately, the Commission compiled a data set with over 250,000 lines of data spanning projects from 2006 to 2010. This is the landscape data set that's now publicly available for download and use. As I'm sure you can imagine, it contains a substantial amount of as-of-yet untapped data. In these figures, you can see some of the analyses that the Commission undertook as part of the Landscape Project. For example, looking at human subjects projects by department and agency over 2010, and looking at those projects by location in the same year. Ultimately, the Commission drew many conclusions from the Landscape Project, as you'll see on the slide. Importantly, it recognized that collecting this project-level information is not a magic bullet, but can provide insight into where to look further to examine the ethics of research. I now want to move on to how this data set can be used by instructors, students, researchers, and others. This slide shows the contents of Appendix 1 of the Moral Science Report, which is a collection of tables and analyses the Commission conducted as part of the Landscape Project. I particularly want to draw your attention to this last set of tables listed, the proportion tables. They give the response rates for certain variables contained in the data set, and as such can inform areas that are particularly ripe for future analysis. And here is a list of the data fields that the agencies provided as part of the Landscape Project. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them one at a time, but I do want you to see them so you get a sense of the breadth of the information that this database contains. For example, field number 2 here, the NCT number, can provide a link between the Commission's data set and clinicaltrials.gov. You'll also see in fields 3 and 4, the title of the study and abstract. Those are natural language fields, which are, again, certainly ripe for additional study and analysis. There's also a fair amount of information about project locations and project funding. During the analysis and cleaning process, additional data fields were added, which you can see here. Now again, these fields, as well as the ones on the previous slide, are explained in much further detail, both in a data dictionary that's available for download at bioethics.gov, as well as in the Moral Science Report, particularly in the Methods Appendix, which is Appendix 2. Now, there's not a lot of additional information in these cleaning fields, but numbers 9, 10, and 11 specifically have the bulk of new information and provide additional ways to look at some of the extramural projects that are contained in the data set. There are many areas for future research, as you'll see here, and some of these areas could certainly serve as bases for training or educational exercises. Looking and reviewing the text fields that I had just mentioned, like study title and abstract, comparing the landscape data set with existing databases, sampling the data set for additional empirical analyses, and of course, answering discrete descriptive questions about the landscape of federally supported human subjects research. There's much more information on these data available at the sources that are listed here. And of course, if you find yourself using these data, whether in an educational setting or a research setting, please let us know. Drop an email to education@bioethics.gov. It's great to hear what's going on out there with these sources. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this point, I'd like to turn things back over to our moderator, Hillary Wakai-Vyers, to open the question and answer session. Thank you.
And thank you, Misty, Kate, and Lisa. We will now open it up for questions. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the online Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Questions have been coming in throughout the talk. And to get us started, Lisa, I'd like to direct a question to you. And several folks have written in and just wondered, why is bioethics education so important, and what can the Commission add to that discussion?
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It's an excellent question. Bioethics education, clearly, we have seen the importance of this endeavor over history through failings in bioethics and ethical research and other things. But we've also seen, what we haven't seen but we know happens is a great deal of ethical research. And we know that ethical education, ethics education, research, responsible conduct of research education can really help prepare scientists of all stripes to do their best ethical work. We know that as science moves forward and technology moves us into many interesting fields that require not just medical professionals, but other types of scientists, some with whom research will be done with human participants, others bench scientists who might wonder where their role is in this research with human participants and bioethics, and what would they have to do with it. The idea is that all of this work is done to better the human condition, to better human health, to help us use technology to better our lives. And that's where bioethics comes in. It's not just how do we responsibly engage in research, but how do we act as responsible professionals? How do we ensure that what we create and what we study and the technologies we produce from our research are used in a way, implemented in socially responsible ways. So because we have many different disciplines, all of which get different kinds of ethical training, this commission is particularly well poised to, because of its diversity in disciplines, but also because of the types of topics it's examined, is particularly well perched to add to the materials for bioethics education to bring together, to bring a baseline, a floor to the types of education and the educational materials available to all scientists. So it's also, if for those of you who haven't already had a chance to check out the video at bioethics.gov on the education page, you'll see that this commission is particularly committed to bioethics education and to ensuring that all persons who are involved in science, technology, research that involves humans are well versed in how to do this ethically.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'd like to direct the next question to Misty. Misty, listeners have been writing in, do you have any suggestions for a college science professor on how to use these resources?
That's a great question, and I do. I think that really it's the way in which it would be used for a college professor will depend on the course they are teaching. The modules in particular have been designed to be flexible so that they can be integrated in small pieces or in a large way to allow a professor or an instructor to integrate wherever they see fit. So they might talk about a small piece of a topic within the realm of their regular curriculum, or they might choose to do a small series using a larger portion of the modules. They're designed purposely to be flexible so that we're not dictating how a professor or an instructor might use these materials, but they can really choose how it best fits in with their educational goals. I think that is true for the other materials as well that were described. They can be used quantitatively or qualitatively in small pieces or taken as a whole.
Hillary, this is Lisa. I would also add that, as I mentioned earlier, the focus here really is on skill building and decision making and incorporating an ethical perspective. So a professor, an instructor who teaches a topic or a subject other than ethics, this is a perfect kind of thing where they can introduce ethics integrated into their own discipline and topic, because we do focus really on these three areas that can be part of any course, any subject.
Great, thanks so much. This next question is for Michelle. Michelle, has the Landscape Data Project had an impact on how agencies are tracking research projects?
Sure, it's a great question. Thank you for that. The experience of going through the Landscape Project was incredibly informative, and I think it was on one of the slides that you saw earlier, showing that really one of the main findings was how variable agency systems are. The Commission ultimately made a recommendation that agencies make available a core set of data on the web for the public to be able to know what's going on in their human subjects research portfolios. Since that recommendation, there has been movement. One piece of this movement that did get some pickup is that the Department of Defense actually is moving forward with developing a web-based system to track their human subjects research. And with a lot of the discussion around that, did note the experience with the Commission in this Landscape Project in informing that project. So there's one very concrete example right there about how some change has come about as a result of this project. And of course, we've also collected a lot of information that certainly is a tool for future research, scholarship, and learning.
Great, thanks for that. And this next question, both Kate and Michelle, I'm sure you have things to offer on this. And the question is, listeners want to know examples. They want to know how the materials are being used now and by whom. Kate, do you want to go first?
Sure. So the Commission itself has actually engaged in several different types of outreach with its own educational materials. We have taught sort of small group workshops at larger research ethics conferences. In another case, we actually did institutional review board training, which is pretty interesting. And then I also had the opportunity to teach a responsible conduct of research class for all of a set of incoming students that were mixed scientists as well as medical students and even history students. So that was pretty interesting as well. I also know that one particularly enlightened professor has dedicated an entire seminar at his law school to teaching the Guatemala case, sort of walking students through what historical investigation looks like and the types of legal and ethical ramifications of the experiment at the time and sort of how that affects what it is that we do now. So there's a really broad range, at least of the Guatemala experiments, but I'll sort of turn it over to Michelle for some of our others.
Sure, thanks, Kate. And the Landscape Project data set has been available for a shorter amount of time than the Guatemala materials. But I do know of at least one university where it's being used as a training tool for graduate students, I believe, to really dig in and do some empirical bioethics work. So through, again, the education at bioethics.gov email address and hopefully folks like everyone on this teleconference or webinar being in touch, hopefully we can hear more about how it's being used and what's working, what's not. But I have at least heard anecdotally that it is being used in the university setting for empirical bioethics work.
Great, thank you both. And I'm actually going to take this next question. The question comes from listeners, how do I find out about new materials? And I'm excited to announce that the Bioethics Commission is now on Twitter, as of this morning, in fact. As we post new educational materials, we will tweet about them. So please follow us on Twitter @bioethicsgov. That's @bioethicsgov. If you're not on Twitter, please consider following our blog. That's blog.bioethicsgov, or regularly checking back on our website, bioethics.gov. You can also always drop us a line via email, and the best address is education@bioethics.gov. And then, Lisa, let me direct this next question to you. What do you see as the biggest challenges to implementing the new modules in existing curricula?
Thank you, Hillary. I think, there are a couple. One is we as bioethics instructors or people who have been teaching this get used to the cases we know, and it's very easy to stick with what we know. So I think mostly it's incumbent upon us as contemporary bioethics educators to incorporate some of these new bioethics resources, to think about how we can engage students and excite them about these contemporary issues that rise to the level of a presidential commission. I think the beauty of these, as we've mentioned, is that they're extremely flexible. So incorporating one new case or one new discussion or one new lecture is easy, and you wouldn't have to do a wholesale revisit of an entire course. So I don't see many challenges. I think that there is a great deal of support around these materials, and we would really like to hear from folks who try these materials, both the challenges that you might be having and ways in which we can be helpful with alleviating that, and also really interested in, as I mentioned earlier, success stories, the ways in which you all are using these materials, because we'd really like to share that with others. Our mission here is to get these materials in the hands of bioethics instructors, so our future bioethicists. So we have a generation of future bioethicists who know these materials, who can understand the contemporary and the complex issues that we all deal with and will deal with in the future as technology and science and medicine and health only get more complex.
Thank you. And I think this next question, either Misty or Lisa would be great to answer. And the question is, how might a bioethics course look different depending on its target audience? For example, graduate students versus postgraduate laboratory scientists. What are essential components of bioethics education that all audiences could benefit from?
Well, this is Lisa. I'll go ahead and take a stab, and then I'll defer to Misty. But I think, it really depends a great deal on how much background folks have. And one of the things we've tried to do with these modules is supply both some fundamental background information, so either instructors and or participants who don't have a lot of background can get up to speed on some principles and basic theories and such before they get to the actual skill building and decision making and incorporation of ethical perspectives, but to actually steep that in something, the ethical tradition. So we add a little bit of that. That might not be necessary for a class, for example, or a bioethics major, for example, who's been through a lot of the theory. So those folks who have a lot of background, it might just be easy to pick up a couple modules and dig right into the case, for example, or to dig right into the tough questions. The other piece of this is there are additional resources. So for those more advanced students or instructors, it might be that some of it seems basic or seems like it wouldn't be that useful as is. And so for that situation, we've added some additional resources and additional reading and potential cases, et cetera. So we tried to cover all the different scenarios where we would have a situation where there would need to be background. Then we get into the problem solving and ethical analysis, and those where that's already been done. Misty?
Yeah. So the only thing I think I would like to add is that one difference that I would like to point out is for the generation of students currently still students. I think Lisa is absolutely right. I think getting in with this education and some of the underlying principles that we hope to inform the way that they conduct their day-to-day work as they move through their career is essential. Now, you also mentioned a second group, and that is kind of postgraduate researchers, researchers who are already steeped in their work, and they're not students any longer. But these materials are also designed for use in kind of professional seminars and updates and courses, and we've tried to make them flexible enough that they can be used in that realm. And the way that I suspect that would look different, and in fact part of our goal is that for many researchers they deal with a regulatory framework here where ethics is a part of that, and there are already courses in the responsible conduct of research, and a lot of those things do exist. And part of our goal in these materials is not to reiterate that and to say necessarily what those regulations are. That's not what we're going for. But what we are really trying to make clear is the ethical reasoning and the reasons these regulations are in place, and why it's important for researchers to consider this throughout the process of their research from beginning to end, and really provide for them the ethical underpinnings for all of this. And that's where we hope to be able to reach that particular group.
Great, thank you. And Lisa, I think you should field this next question. And the question is, will there be education material available for research ethics topics other than those focused on research with human participants and human subjects?
Thanks, great question. So one of the things we're committed to here as we create these materials is to create them resulting from, as a direct continuation from the products that the Commission itself creates, from the recommendations and the reports. So we follow what the Commission has put forward. And so if you see, you'll see when you look at the materials that they track well with the Commission reports. So the Commission has done 5 reports so far. We are working on 2 others now. Most of the reports that the Commission has done, when we talk about research ethics, most of the recommendations and such have revolved around research with human participants. The Commission has not made any recommendations or done any analysis with research with animal participants or research with animals, animal subjects. So we wouldn't be creating any materials around that unless the Commission speaks on that topic. Whether that's something that comes up in the future, I don't know. But if so, we'll certainly do our best to create some effective materials around those topics.
And Lisa, I suspect the answer will be similar for this next question. Does the Commission have any plans to tackle clinical ethics education as much as it has done for research ethics?
Great question. You know, it's interesting because there are so many different ways, and we say ethics now, and there's so many different ways in which people incorporate that into their own thinking. We have this whole kind of way of thinking about professional ethics. That is, you know, how am I a good scientist? What makes me a good researcher? What makes me a virtuous clinician, et cetera. So there's the professional ethics piece, and there's a lot of that in what the Commission has recommended in the Commission reports. In fact, 2 of the recommendations they have made around this kind of educating and training piece are about professionals' responsibility to be ethical, and those are a couple that I mentioned or alluded to earlier in my talk. So that professional ethics part is really important. The research ethics part is critical, obviously, not only in our human subjects work, both with Guatemala and with the moral science report, but also with the medical countermeasure research with children. I mean, obviously, we delved in there into some really, ethically challenging questions around research with vulnerable populations, in this case children who are unable to consent for themselves. So that's the research ethics. And then, of course, the clinical ethics is a different question. That is, what do you do around a clinical case? You're a care provider, and there are some ethical challenges around what to do for that patient. Now, the Commission has not had a report about clinical ethics to date. Currently, we're working on a report on incidental findings in several contexts, including the clinical context. So there might be something there that we could look at and potentially develop around clinical ethics there. But that report will not be out until the end of the year. But we will take a look at that and see if there's something that's applicable. And then, of course, the bigger piece, which is the social implications, and these kinds of ethics, what science, what our research, the implications of our science and research, that has those have implications for all of us who are involved in this enterprise. So that's yet another area of ethics that the Commission has talked about, and we will continue to work on developing materials for.
Great, thank you. And Kate, this next question is for you. And a listener writes in, can we use the study guide and any other resources available for educational purposes outside of the United States?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, so actually the Commission has released the report, the Ethically Impossible report, in Spanish. So certainly it would be well tailored to Latin American students and students speaking Spanish. The Commission is also currently in the process of translating the study guide. So that will be available soon for teachers teaching in Spanish. So certainly we definitely support and encourage that.
Great, thanks so much. And Misty, why don't you answer this question? The question is, how will the Commission evaluate how useful these educational tools are?
Well, one of the main things that we are looking for in the near term is certainly the feedback by the instructors and professors that are using it. That will give us our initial reads on how they're being taught and how successful they are deemed to be in the eyes of those instructors and the students. Now, over the long term, we plan to look at their use. Now, we have some fairly basic ways of tracking that. We're watching mostly downloads from our website and then tracking the feedback that we receive, and that will give us some information on how often they are being used, and in some cases how and how successfully. In the more kind of the distance long run, we simply look for possible changes, eventually hearing about changes in that the training might make for professionals down the line.
Great, thanks so much. And I believe we have time for one more question. And that question is, I'll direct this to Lisa and or Misty, what's coming next, and how are you making that determination as to what's coming next?
That's a great question, absolutely. Well, we are continuing to develop more educational modules. Some of the additional topics that we are working on at the moment include compensation for research-related injury, research with vulnerable populations, the notion of privacy, and ethical research design. Speaking back to an earlier question, that last one, ethical research design, is one that will begin to address, I think, research that doesn't apply just to human subjects research, but may reach beyond to all scientific design, which hopefully will be of use. We're also working on additional informed consent and community engagement modules that relate to other Bioethics Commission reports, including our Safeguarding Children report and the New Directions in Synthetic Biology report. So we have a number of things in the works that we will be adding to our modules online as they are ready, and it will be on a rolling basis.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, just a quick note for those of you on the line or those of you who check out bioethics.gov for these materials. We do encourage you to check back frequently because we will, as Misty had mentioned, we will be updating and adding resources and encourage you both to check back for those resources and to give us some feedback with your experience with the current materials. So please don't come just once, but visit the site often.
Great, and that tees up my reminder to follow us on Twitter at bioethics.gov perfectly. Thank you, Lisa. And I want to thank everybody. That is all the time that we have today. Again, follow us on Twitter at bioethics.gov, and if you have any follow-up questions, please email us at education@bioethics.gov. Many thanks to our speakers and to you, our audience. We will be sending you a link to this recorded webinar once it's available, as well as a survey about today's webinar. Your feedback is really important, so thanks in advance for filling that out. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.